When Jingliu first came out in version 1.4, people were ecstatic to see what she would be capable of. Being a member of the High Cloud Quintet and the previous Sword Master of the Shinjo, a gorgeous animated short was made to promote her. She was all the rage during the early days of Honkai Star, with tons of power, tons of lore, and tons of power creep at the time. But for some inexplicable reason, after the Luofu Trailblaze mission concluded, it felt as if she completely vanished off the face of the earth, almost like Koyo forgot about her. Fortunately, narrative-wise, they briefly lampshaded that she was still at large in 2.4, and with 2.5 having been out for a while by the time you see this, I'm sure we'll finally have that loose end taken care of. But how well has Jingliu aged gameplay-wise? She was once considered the best DPS character in the game for being an all-around good attacker with a very consistent baseline. Anecdotally speaking though, I can't remember the last time I actually used her, nor do I feel like many people use her right now. She's not as obscure as Blade, not by any stretch of the imagination, and overall opinions of her are still more or less favorable, albeit not quite as high praise compared to what it used to be. So for today, we'll be discussing what happened to Jingliu over the past year. Do we overrate her, or is she merely a victim of circumstance? Now before we talk about Braxavon's favorite waifu who we cheated on multiple times, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor for today, ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN, as I'm sure you've seen before, is a virtual private network that keeps you safe whenever using unsecured or unencrypted public Wi-Fi networks. With cybersecurity threats being that much more prevalent in this day and age, it's in your best interest to keep your information and yourself as safe as possible. With ExpressVPN, you can do exactly that by using world-class encryption and location masking to protect you from hackers while using unsecure Wi-Fi. Similarly, ExpressVPN also makes it more difficult for advertisers to track you online, along with all the usual perks that VPNs offer, namely your ability to set your IP address to any location across the world. Very handy whenever you need unsecured access to sites and services online, like if you want to watch movie, anime, and other series on streaming platforms like Netflix, even if they're blocked in your home country. Also, the aforementioned location changing can help you watch movies, anime, and other series on streaming platforms like Netflix, even if they're blocked in your home country. You can also use it to prevent potential IP leaks on stream or to lower in-game lag. For example, if you're trying to play Genshin or Starl and your ISP is being mucky with you, like if your bandwidth is being throttled, then you can try using a VPN to circumvent that and fix your ping. Best of all, ExpressVPN's available on all platforms and devices ranging from PC to mobile, so you can have one service for all of them. I'm a huge fan of using VPNs, especially while traveling, and I highly recommend you start using one as well if you aren't already. Find out how you can get 3 months free by scanning the QR code on screen or by going to expressvpn.com/Vars. Thanks again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring the video, but for now, let's get back on topic. Honestly, I can't help but wonder if the period of dominance by the Destruction Trio is to blame for their mild loss of relevance now. Blade, Lunai Danheng, and Jingliu, namely the latter two, were effectively the best units in the game by a wide margin at the time. Reason for that was because of how off-the-shelf they were. While the majority of HSR's roster entails characters working in concert with each other for maximum efficiency back in version 1, there still had yet to be enough units for full cohesive parties. The follow-up engine didn't see its first flagship lineup until 2.2, damage over time wasn't fully realized until 2.0, and break teams weren't a thing until 2.3. So for most of 1.0 through 1.6, players were in need of someone who could work really well regardless of who they had. Blade was a good start in that technically he was fully self-sufficient, but in light of not receiving any meaningful support since then, his mediocre ceiling has relegated him to being a mid-tier more often than not. Lunai Danheng was a measurable upgrade in strength, possessing an unmatched DPS ceiling back then, but the exorbitant SP cost to play him at maximum strength made him less accommodating to play. That's where Jingliu came in. All things considered, at the time of her release, she had virtually no downside relative to the existing competition. Nearly every DPS unit that came before had some kind of limitation to them that could not be overcome through proper play alone. Seela was at risk of getting totally screwed if she came across minions who can tank more than one hit. As I've gone over intensively last week in my video on Jingyuan, among other things, he can get shut down completely if he gets crowd controlled. Danheng can run out of SP, and Tanya didn't come out until 1.5. You could not play him at his best even if you wanted to, unless you were one of the rare few who unironically played E6 Yukong. All of their limitations are what made Jingliu stand out. While the Imbibitor Lunai still held the record for the highest damage, none of that mattered when it was all theoretical and literally unobtainable. On the other hand, Jingliu was a bit more balanced, which initially worked to her benefit. The gist of her gameplay is to activate her talent, which you can do so through her skill, ultimate, and/or technique, each granting a stack of syzygy. Upon reaching 2 stacks, Jingliu immediately advances forward to be next in line to act, and she gains 50% bonus crit rate for the duration of her talent. Her skill would then become empowered to consume stacks instead of SP, dealing a huge amount of blast damage on its own, but an additional amount of DPS would be tacked onto it, along with her basic and ultimate, by essentially having her entire party pay a health cost. Jingliu's appeal came from how easy it is to get her into prime position. If you can use her technique before getting in battle, which you can in all 3 endgame modes, then with just one cast of skill you basically started the fight with her talent active. Furthermore, you could extend the duration of this state by using her ultimate to give you an additional stack, allowing you to get a 3rd skill off before she would have to reset and build up her supply again. At the time, the damage on her attacks was essentially the weighted average of Lunai Danheng's. I don't know how many gacha players are into Smash Bros, but to make an analogy, Jingliu was to Danheng what Chrom and Lucina are to Roy and Mark. In layman's terms, she had a lower ceiling in exchange for a much higher floor, making her extremely consistent. Because of how fast she could get into her empowered state, Jingliu's playstyle worked nicely with the general sentiment that front-loaded burst damage is the way to go. She could get her 2 stacks immediately at the start of battle, then nuke everyone with her ultimate and skill, taking advantage of her sheer base strength. On the subject of base strength, that was another factor behind her early popularity. For all intents and purposes, she effectively had all of the positives of Yanqing with none of the negatives. 50% crit rate just by existing is a huge weight off your shoulders. With her empowered skill having no SP cost, she was also very SP positive. Not only that, but she had one of the most convenient techniques in the game, guaranteeing a freeze at the start of battle. And she even added token amount of protection through her A2 trace. I meant it when I said you could pull her right off the shelf and get going with her right away. Though that's not to say she was an early game pick. Being heavily driven by base strength, maxing her traces was integral to seeing her at full strength. That being said, if you had to choose between a unit who peaks with ability level or a unit who peaks with relics, everyone would choose the former without hesitation. The only thing you had to keep in mind when playing her was to only use her ultimate while her talent was in effect, lest you miss out on a ton of DPS. But that's about it. Altogether, you had someone with great SP economy, phenomenal front-loaded damage, a fair amount of wave clear being a blast attacker, she could use just about any teammate courtesy of her low SP cost, and the potential to freeze enemies was a nice bonus. To the surprise of no one, she quickly established herself as the best attacker in the game. A title that unfortunately she would not keep for too long. Chief among the factors leading to Jingliu's decline is that her greatest asset of being self-contained is also her greatest flaw. She had access to a variety of party members, but only because there's nothing she specifically needed, therefore she could make do with anything. However, whatever support she got would only go as far as what that support was, and not a single bit more. For example, Bronya's turn advancement on Seela is so valuable since it doesn't give her just one turn, but the potential for a second one thanks to Seela's reset mechanic. Or another one, Sparkle's SP replenishment to Lunai Danheng is reciprocated by his gluttonous consumption of it, which is a good thing for Sparkle as her party-wide damage buff hinges on spending lots of SP. In a similar fashion to how Jingliu unlocks himself out of joining the greater follow-up attack engine, Jingliu locks herself out of, well, basically everything. She's too self-contained that she becomes unable to adapt to or assimilate any outside changes that could positively affect her. Jingliu's team has practically not been updated since the day she came out. Her current best party right now, I would say, is herself, Luocha, Bronya, and Pela, all of whom were available before 1.4. Once more, you could make use of newer support characters like Sparkle, Robin, Huohuo, Ranne, and such, but there's no semblance of complement between them and Jingliu. You're better off attaching them to units who can take their supportive faculty much further than just a one-to-one conversion. This obviously presents an issue with future-proofing, or lack thereof. Anytime a new support comes out, Jingliu will never be the biggest beneficiary of them because she's so self-contained to a fault that while she doesn't need anyone, it also means she doesn't synergize with anyone beyond what they intrinsically offer. Even Jingyuan, who I mentioned suffers from not having much room for synergy, can still benefit from things like bonus follow-up attack damage, bonus summon damage, stuff like that. But Jingliu doesn't really have much that can boost her by a substantial amount. She has a custom ammo system, Syzygy, compared to Lunai Danheng who functions off a universal ammo system, skill points. Jingliu is not a follow-up attacker, nor a breaker, nor a dot dealer, nor a counter-attacker, nothing of the sort. She's just plain damage. Good damage, mind you, but there's only so much you can do with just that. Every DPS unit that has come out since version 2 was designed to account for possible future inclusions that could improve their current standing. For example, Akron's ultimate can stack up if anyone on the party inflicts a debuff, not just her, meaning any debuff-oriented support like the recently added Jiaoqiu will further push her up the rankings. Firefly's a break-oriented hyper carry. Anyone who can shrug toughness gauges, give her more break effect, or do something pertaining to breaks will further push her up the rankings. Most notably, virtually everyone in the follow-up attack engine gets buffed whenever a new follow-up attacker gets released. Topaz, Ratio, and Aventurine all got buffed when Robin came out, then those 4 units all got buffed when Jade came out, then those 5 units all got buffed when March came out, then those 6 units all got buffed when Fei Shell came out, so on and so forth. Comparatively, no one looks at a new character and goes, yo, they would go so well with Jingliu. Am I trying to insinuate that Jingliu isn't worth building? Absolutely not, she's still a really strong and reliable character. It's just that over the past few years, while other characters have gone from 0 to hero, Jingliu has been stagnating due to not getting indirectly buffed from anything. If we were to grasp Estros, the one thing that can help her out is freeze, given she has a way to initiate combat with it. But we've been having trouble finding good situations to use her specifically in. mostly because, once again, there's no combination of memory turbulence or blessing that can work in her favor. It's always one of the engines, follow-ups, damage over time, break, etc. Granted, there have been cycles with enemies that are weak to ice. I recall during springtime they had a few cycles that were ice-oriented, but it just so happened that lightning was also present for most of them, and yeah, there's Akron. From 2.2 until now, we haven't had a single ice-oriented chamber, I don't think. Over the past month, we've had the Big Sleep, which is ice-oriented for the second wave, marking the first time Jingliu has been able to find a use case, and by the time you see this, the current Epoch Shadow is practically made for Jingliu if it wasn't apparent by the 55% ice damage axiom. However, she's not the best person for the Cycle Blessing, as it favors the follow-up attack engine. Therein lies the biggest issue affecting her current condition. She's nothing but a brute force attacker in a meta where brute force attacking just isn't a thing anymore. For brute force attacking to be good, it needs to be Akron levels to overcome that, and though Jingliu still outputs considerable damage, she's a product of version 1's power scaling. What made her so valuable in the early days was that she had no gimmick, making her more reliable and consistent to use. But in light of the direction Star is taking right now, characters need to specialize in something to even be considered, let alone meta relevant. Aventuring's a tank who can follow-up attack, Yunli's a counter-attacker, Xiao Tuo's a dot debuffer, Fei Xiao's a boss killer who revolves around follow-ups, Ling Xiao's a summon break-oriented healer. I would say the only gimmick to Jingliu's name is a party-wide HP drain, which I suppose is worth going over. A niche yet surprisingly competitive team during 1.4 was Jingliu and Blade. Until Jade, Jingliu was the only unit who can drain the health of her party members, making her the only one who can support Blade's win condition of killing himself, despite not being a support herself. It was the first case of a double carry team composition in Honkai Star, and credit where it's due, it wasn't half bad. Of course, nowadays it's not a very efficient party with how far we've come in regards to min-maxing, and unfortunately there doesn't seem to be any indication of health draining becoming a new engine either. We did get Jade, but she's more of a follow-up attacker, not an HP taker. Furthermore, I have a feeling even if such an engine were to come out, Jingliu wouldn't be able to capitalize on it. She herself doesn't work out the loss or gain of health, so it would make little sense to pair her up with Jade or possible future lifestealers on account of it doing nothing for her. Conversely, Jingliu is a main DPS, so her own lifestealing mechanic wouldn't be an optimal choice to have for a future attacker, as that would force you to play her as a support or secondary DPS at best. Why this doesn't work is because Jingliu's kit necessitates full attention being directed towards her, being a hyper-carrying doll. And besides, if a character comes out with an identical attack style to Blade, they would rather have a dedicated support, not Jingliu. The way I can see her using the HP loss mechanic is if something comes out with a quantity-based activation requirement, as in it doesn't matter how much HP is drained, just if HP is drained. Given she can lifesteal her entire party, that's 3 people losing HP per action. Generally speaking though, she just doesn't have a gimmick that can actually be weaponized, leaving us with only 2 options to get her back to form. Option 1. Force an ice meta. By that I mean make supports or conditions that drastically favor ice element units. Jingliu is still by and large the only worthwhile ice DPS to build, not counting Herta and Pure Fiction. So if a support comes out with a buff that gives ice units a 200% crit damage boost or something, that's a way you can buff Jingliu without buffing the competition. This can be difficult to pull off without it being egregiously obvious what Hoyo is trying to do. An alternative would be to make Freeze a more impactful crowd control effect. A planner ornament set that reduces enemy defense by 30% or something when frozen, that could buff Jingliu a lot by virtue of her technique, and it would be less conspicuous as it can technically also buff Misha. Option 2, and the more unlikely one, making a support who rewards characters for not using SP with their skill. We already have Sparkle who gives you an incentive to burn SP, but not a support who gives players an incentive to not burn SP. Jingliu's custom ammo system in the form of Syzygy enables her to attack enemies without using up SP. There aren't that many units to attack in that way. I think she might be the only one who still deals damage without costing SP. Actually, there is one more, but we're not gonna talk about him. Anyway, a buff that gives you bonus damage if the skill doesn't consume SP is one other option for making Jingliu strong. Expectedly, both solutions are pushing it, and that's why I think she's losing a lot of presence in the metagame. Jingliu is a general character in a meta that's only progressively becoming more specialized. It's not just her, mind you. Lunai, Danheng, and Blade have also been losing ground as a result of being nothing but regular attackers. Modern destruction units like Firefly and Yunli have been given the aforementioned specializations, breaks and counter follow-up respectively. So, has Jingliu fallen off? Yes? Definitely from her previous number 1 standing, of that I'm certain, but at the same time, it's hard to say that she's washed. Even with all the new characters, she's still highly prized for being consistent, strong, and self-contained. Those strengths have not diminished, but only time will tell how long that will last for. If a new Ice DPS comes out later on in version 2 or version 3, she's gonna be in big trouble. And not to get too far ahead of myself here, but let's just say a puppet with attitude problems has something to say in the not so distant future. But hey, they can always retcon Jingliu like how they did with Lunai Danheng and release a Jingliu 2 or something. Not entirely out of the question. What do you guys think about Jingliu? Do you think she's doing fine, or do you believe her best days are behind her? Feel free to share in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other What Happened To videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.